Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
Episode of Tracking the Tropics. We've got a ton of moisture, but not much else going on in the tropics right now, and that's a good thing. Today on Tracking the Tropics, we're going to be talking about how a quiet season can sometimes mean a backloaded busy season, and also our favorite Saharan dust. Joining me right now, my co-host, meteorologist Juliana Mejia. Welcome, Juliana. I know you've been working hard on these graphics, and I think that one says it all. Moisture forecast.
Exactly.
We got a lot of it out there.
Yeah, plenty of it. Already kind of seeing the activity picking up so far this morning across northern parts of Florida, central parts of Florida, and here in the Bay Area. And that's in part due to high pressure now exiting and low pressure taking its place, kind of gliding off of the coast of the Carolinas and the southeast coast of the United States. This is attached to this kind of decaying boundary. So not forecast to be anything tropical, but it is going to glide over the area. And we were actually just talking about this. So this is a very similar setup to what was our wannabe Dexter and what we were anticipating to potentially be Dexter never came to be. And if y'all had been tuned into the forecast, it actually, this moisture wrapped right around and is pretty much gliding over area for round two. It essentially did a loop-de-loop, a glorified loop-de-loop. And that low pressure system is just going to bring more rain and quite a bit of rain at that yet again to the same areas, pretty much almost the entirety of the Gulf Coast, stretching from South Florida all the way up into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and even eastern portions of coastal Texas. So there's a comparison just to give y'all an idea of the GFS rainfall accumulations upwards of, I want to say 4 inches or so in some isolated pockets there, and the Euro very, very similar. So again, luckily not looking to be a tropical something. This is just a good low pressure system that's bringing some, plenty of rain, I should say, a low end flood risk day by day across portions of the Gulf Coast. Definitely not comparable to that last round of this low pressure system that was potentially going to try to be a tropical something last week or the week prior. Now we are actually quiet in the tropics. We had previously been monitoring Invest 94L. I'm sure plenty of y'all have seen that on social media. That it was, let me see if I can zoom into it, right there. East of the Caribbean, was kind of inching its way towards the Caribbean as a tropical wave that wanted to try to do a little something, and it did not. It really lost its opportunity to do anything because of a whole mixture of some dry air in the atmosphere, unfavorable strong winds. So you see the dry air to the north, and I'm sure it's just kind of getting wrapped up into all of that. It really has stayed so disorganized. It's just this cluster of storms, and dry air is pretty rampant across the Atlantic for the meantime. And what you see for moisture and some showers and storms are tropical waves. But also wanted to make a note there too of some pockets of wind shear, especially into the Caribbean. So even if that Invest, what formerly was an Invest, made it into the Caribbean, it wasn't going to last. And you can even see the wind shear then coming in and swooping in from the north and east, which is probably a big part of the reason why the National Hurricane Center ditched that. It dropped out off to a 0% chance of tropical development, and now it's just erased it off of the map. There's our little tropical wave train with what we're tracking so far. And I know, Rebecca, you wanted to talk a little bit more about Saharan dust.
Yes, it's my favorite.
Yeah, it's that time of year where it's like really, honestly, quite peaking.
Yes,
right,
absolutely. Amanda and I were talking about it earlier, and you were there too, Juliana. I was asking her, do you feel like it's a little late in the season? And both of you guys were like, no, it does end abruptly. And so I think maybe because I have a vacation in August, I've already fast forwarded to August and I've skipped over July. But usually by the end of July, beginning of August, that Saharan dust ends abruptly. And we love Saharan dust on Tracking the Tropics. We know it does not cause things to be quiet, but it does when it's present. That means that we are less likely to see any tropical activity because because of all the contributing factors that allow for Saharan dust, also squash hurricanes. And so Saharan dust really peaking in June, July, and August, and then dropping off quickly at the end of August, beginning of September. And it's really kind of rare to see Saharan dust over the winter, especially across the Atlantic. And so what we're going to see is big, thick plumes of Saharan dust continuing to track our way. This is a forecast Thursday into Friday. And so especially for the Tampa Bay area and really most of the Gulf Coast, by the weekend, we're looking at Saharan dust hazy sunsets. And so sometimes that makes them a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more colorful. It certainly dries things out. And what it's doing for the Tampa Bay area and a lot of the Southeast as well is drying us out, because just like how Juliana was talking about how much moisture is across the Southeast right now, once the Saharan dust moves in for the weekend, that's drier air. And so that's going to not only lower our chances for rain, it's going to clear our skies out a little bit. It may be a little hazy during the day, but it is not going to be one of those days where we're going to see those giant complexes of thunderstorms rolling out across the area, because it is drier and that's more stable air. And so I also want to remind anyone watching, this is an interactive program and we want to hear your questions and your thoughts, how much you love Saharan dust too, all about it. But in order for us to be able to see your comments and bring them on the screen here, you do have to use one of the hashtags. It's hashtag Hey Rebecca or hashtag Hey Juliana, and then we'll be able to bring your comments onto the screen. And so what Juliana is showing right now is those tropical waves. Tropical waves are not tropical systems. They're just areas of thunderstorms. And what we're watching for them is for them to start to organize and start to spin. And that's so much less likely when we have that thick plume of Saharan dust keeping the atmosphere so stable out there, as well as the shear that Juliana was showing earlier. And so the combination of the shear and the drier air is keeping things quiet in the tropics. Now, here's what I don't like about statistics in the tropics, because technically, by the number of named systems we've had, we're a little above average already for this season. But we all know that those systems were lived for almost less than a day in some cases. Really, the story with most of them was the inland rain that caused that terrible flooding in Texas. We saw some flooding across the Carolinas from the other storm. And so really the story was inland flooding from the rain. It wasn't a tropical system for very long. And so for most of us, it feels like a very quiet start to the hurricane season. That does mean that we could see a busier end of the season, a backlog, if you will. A lot of times when we do start quiet, that energy that builds across the Atlantic and it builds across the entire hemisphere that we see tropics building in, that energy has to go somewhere. And when we start to see those significant storms firing up and tracking across the Atlantic, it does cool the sea surface temperatures as that storm tracks over it. So that main development region has been so quiet because of shear, but a lot of long-term forecast models do indicate that we are going to see the shear by the back half of the season really looking more La Nina-ish, a little bit less shear out over the Atlantic, and that is more conducive for storms to form. So there's several hints that we are going to continue this quiet start to the season, and there's some hints that that does mean a potential backlog to the end of the season. So we've both lived through those kinds of seasons, Juliana. I don't like to have a busy season the whole time, but I really don't like a backlog season here. There's no good choices here.
Exactly. There's really no winning. And yeah, I feel like last season was kind of an example. I mean, the late October storms, and it's tough at that point too, because I think there is a little bit of a sense of people letting their people that are familiar with the tropics and hurricane season that let their guard down a little bit, and yeah, it's tough all around.
Yes.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head though, for sure, which I'm maybe hoping that it turns out to be wrong, and I hope that you're wrong.
There's no one that would rather have a dud of a season than us. Yeah. We are cheering for a dud. Let's go.
Exactly.
And we ask for you guys to weigh in using our hashtags Hey Rebecca and hashtag Hey Juliana, and you are. So let's get straight to the Q&A portion of our segment here. Use a hashtag, ask a question. The hashtags are hashtag Hey Rebecca or hashtag Hey Juliana. And this one says hashtag Hey Rebecca, when do we start seeing more activity? And Juliana has the perfect graphic pulled up for us. Indeed. Check it out. That little green arrow is where we are at the bottom, kind of at the end, nearing the end of July, not quite to the beginning of August, and see how much activity increases during the month of August, and then it really peaks in September and October. Now, I used to be an East Coast girly in Jacksonville, and I hated September because that was when we could really get whacked. But now that I'm a West Coast girly in Tampa, it's really August and October that we have the potential for those storms to kind of enter the Gulf, and that's what I worry most about here. So those are the interesting time periods for the Tampa Bay area. So it kind of does depend seasonally, and so this is another great graphic from Juliana showing the tropical development regions in July. They're in the Gulf and sometimes the Carolinas, but with the position of the Bermuda High this year, I think the Carolinas is a little less likely than typical years. We've got another question for Juliana. This one's for Juliana. Hashtag, hey Juliana, do you think CSU, NOAA, et cetera, will change their season forecast due to the lack of activity?
Yeah, I mean, as you were just talking about, I guess I'm saying yeah, but no. They tend to, adjust the forecast ever so slightly with those kind of month-to-month updates, but that it's not, unfortunately, I think, going to be the case this season. And it's, you get like this hopeful kind of optimism. You're like, oh, okay, but it's not. That's just unfortunately just based on the way like this. I mean, this is what is it? 70% of hurricane or tropical activity is in the last 2/3 of the season, essentially. It's normal. This is fairly normal, and you can even tell just from where we're at so far. On the timeline is that, yeah, it feels like it's a lack of activity, but it's fairly standard. And like you pointed out, technically it's almost actually like above average or quicker than average. And so my answer is no, I do not think that they're going to back off.
Yeah, especially since they're predicting number of named systems is their first prediction, and we've already had 3. And so technically, their forecasts are delivering. We've got another featured comment. This one's for both of us. Hashtag, hey Rebecca, hashtag, hey Juliana. I am new to the area, but I lived in Southeast Florida for years where 3 p.m. afternoon storms rolling in was common. But here they come in the morning or really any time. Will this continue? And so I kind of had to go through the same transition when I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. Here it is so much about which way the winds are blowing, whether it's a southerly flow and we can get those morning showers, or the westerly flow also can be those morning showers. And this is Darlene Tucker. She must live somewhere near the coastline, or at least along into the west of I-75, because inland areas are like, no, we're still getting those afternoon thunderstorms. And so it's so much about wind flow here. Juliana, I know you did the forecast this morning. How's the wind flow looking and the timing of the storms looking this week?
Yeah. Today is a little kind of almost like, I want to say, a transition, because this low is kind of diving in and then high pressure is exiting and it's working its way west. So right now, essentially, and throughout today, we're going to have a little bit more of that northerly and almost northwesterly flow. So that's why throughout this morning here along the Gulf Coast and along the Bay Area, we've had rain and storms just riding right along the coastline. But it started earlier. Citrus County has seen rain and storms since 5 something this morning. I mean, it was an early start. And then it carries over into the afternoon. And like you said, then because of that north and northwesterly flow, it all gets dragged inland, and then the coast gets a break, and then it is stormy throughout the second half of the day for folks inland. So it definitely depends on where you are. And then as this low pressure works its way west again, then our flow will return and kind of flip. And so then it's very, I don't want to say touch and go, but it changes because it is so touchy each and every day. So that's the setup for the meantime until we get back into our normal clockwork afternoon showers and storms.
Yes, we need I like it with the summers that you get like westerly flow for 1 week and southeasterly flow for 1 week. So that way everybody gets the rain and everybody gets a break in the rain. But I guess no one's taking my vote. All right, we got another question coming in or comment. Hashtag, hey Rebecca, how's North Florida looking for this hurricane season? The last few years have been devastating. And so North Florida certainly has been hit, not quite as hard as Southwest Florida over the last couple of years. For North Florida, it's a really, you get hit by the storms, but a lot of times they've moved across the state like Irma or like Ian. But what the nightmare scenario for North Florida is that kind of 2-week region in September as the Bermuda High is shifting north, that it could sling a storm for more of a direct hit, because it's kind of hard to get a direct hit in North Florida because of the shape of the coastline and because of the position of the Bermuda High. And so Jeff Baradelli, our chief meteorologist, showed this earlier this week, and I got really enamored with it. So on the left is the cone that we had for Hurricane Katrina a few days out. on the right is the cone that we had for Helene. So almost 20 years apart there. The cone has shrunk almost in half. And so that's the forecast margin of error. And so that's how much forecasting has improved over the last 20 years. You know, when I started my career, the spaghetti plots looked like cooked spaghetti. They went all over the place. Now they look like uncooked spaghetti because they all generally agree and they've all gotten so good. And you can see that really hammers it down because had Katrina been on either side of the center of that cone, we would not have seen the final outcome in Katrina with the failed levees and with the flooding that we saw in New Orleans as a result if it had taken a different path. And so with Helene, we knew days out, you know, within 100 miles of where the worst of this devastation was going to be. And so that's how much forecasting has improved. Now, intensity's improved a little bit. If you'll advance the graphic, we can compare the difference between track guidance and intensity.
Yeah, let me slide this forward.
And so both of them have improved. And so this is the intensity. And so what you're looking for is trending down. And so the red line is 24 hours out. The green line is 48 hours out. And so certainly 120 hours, the blue line there, is still the worst in terms of intensity. But in general, over the last 20 years, we've seen about 10 knots of intensity improvement. So that's a room we still have to grow there, but I did like to see that, you know, obviously things are improving because that's always a good sign. When the forecasts are getting better, the information gets easier for people to understand and better for people to make their own make better decisions in terms of what they need to worry about with their home, what they need, you know, whether they need to evacuate or not, because these are all you know, factors that impact your lives. And so love to see that improvement. Can't wait to see what AI does. We already talked about that a couple of weeks ago because that could be a game changer for forecasting.
Exactly. And there's so many different avenues and places for AI to exist and help as well, with like data and then not even just models and forecasting, but also disseminating information. So that's something that I had been, I guess, experiencing kind of firsthand, technically speaking, the last couple seasons, with Spanish and even other language translated forecast discussions coming out from the National Hurricane Center and from other weather service offices and entities, where they have for the past, now I want to say it was before last season, so like 3 of the past seasons before 2024, had been training AI with translating forecast discussions that they would write in English and then getting that out and getting information out to media partners or, you know, even just to the public, in an accurate way, in a way that they were confident in conveying the information correctly. Because it's not as simple as using Google Translate to spit it out, because then, you know, dialects or specifications or different words that may not have a direct translation, the AI needs to be true. So it was really, really interesting, not to go down that rabbit hole, but it was really interesting.
Let's go down the rabbit hole, because that's something that you've worked on in terms of helping, you know, the weather communities decide which way we're going to go, what words we're going to use for specific instances, because it can vary wildly from dialect to dialect, is my understanding, on what you use to say showers versus what you use to say cyclone versus hurricane, so that sorts of things. So what were the decisions made, and what was, you know, kind of what's the messaging looking like?
Well, what's great is that I think they've come to a place where they feel confident, and they're now trying to expand, essentially, is my understanding. So they feel confident with the product that they have coming out with Spanish translations. They've got, I think, French and even potentially Mandarin Chinese, I think, in the mix there.
Wow.
So I think it's a game changer, and AI is helping the Weather Service do that and progress in that way, to make it more accessible and make this information more accessible, because you know, such a large portion of the United States population is Spanish speakers, but then also how many, you know, especially Chinese is the most widely spoken language around the world, let alone how many Chinese speakers there are in the US that may not be getting information, like, you know, if that makes sense. So it has been very cool to see them make progress over the last couple of seasons. I'm intrigued to now like keep up with that throughout this season, because it is, at least in Spanish that I can speak to, what they have been tailoring now, and what I think they're kind of getting to is standardizing. And it's a long process, and it takes the help of what they've used for years is volunteers within the Weather Service, volunteering their time to sit down and make those decisions of what words get used for what. Because something I've communicated before is what's can be difficult to understand is, yes, there are dialects within Spanish. Someone from Latin America has a very different way of speaking and different vocabulary that they use compared to someone from Mexico, so on and so forth. And so the Weather Service has put a lot of time, and even, friends of mine and former colleagues of mine have dedicated a lot of time and research into digging into what can be a standardized dictionary, essentially, that the Weather Service can build this off of. And I think now AI has really helped them take a big step forward in that. And that is just going to, hopefully, fingers crossed, like they're able to still pour time and energy and money into that realm throughout this season and future seasons, that they can just keep pushing forward with that, because it's huge and it's so important. And it connects to things like the push alerts on our phones, the severe weather alerts, things like Amber alerts and such. It is all integrated into that. And people that have, Spanish as their primary language set up on their phone can now get more reliable information and urgent information right there.
That's fantastic. I know you forecasted in both Spanish and English, and we also have the Tampa Oy program here at WFLA, which is our news programming in Spanish and our weather programming in Spanish. What I've noticed about the Tampa Oy tropic streams, especially when a storm is approaching, say, Puerto Rico or some Spanish-speaking region, there's a huge appetite for knowledge and forecasting in Spanish, and so people will seek out our stream to ask questions and to get information. And so I'm sure that's something you've experienced within the Spanish-speaking community when there is a storm threatening, how much that information is needed and how it is appreciated. And now that we do have such great tools like streaming and tracking the tropics, that we can be sitting in Tampa, Florida, helping someone in a region that's potentially being affected.
Exactly. And that's it's the interesting, like, intersection of it all, I guess is the word to say, is that the nation of origin of different folks, like, people that live here in Florida, there's so much diversity when it comes to Hispanic Latino populations in Florida alone, and they more than likely still have family living in, for example, Puerto Rico, living in Latin America or portions of the Caribbean, that are also watching the tropics as closely as we are, and likely watching the same systems that'll bring impacts to Florida from time to time. And they have different levels of understanding of different types of what. So someone, yes, from the Caribbean may be familiar with tropical systems. Someone, though, from Argentina, from South Latin America, has probably never encountered tropical weather. It's no different than Florida transplants, me being from Chicago, people from up north that have never experienced, and they don't know the first thing about really what to anticipate. And I'm so glad to see things like our Tampa Oy program that now are really blossoming and have the opportunity to get this information out, but not only get the information out, but educate the community and familiarize people with, it is quite literally is educating people on what does this mean, and how seriously to take different threats, because they simply may not know. They may not know even the vocabulary sometimes may be completely foreign to them, depending on where they came from. So if that makes, hopefully, I think a decent analogy is, transplants from Florida may not be familiar. And you flip that too. Those of us from Florida and then have moved to other places, I mean, you're not going to be as familiar with severe weather. We get it in doses, but definitely not the same way that the plains do, or wildfire and earthquakes, so on and so forth. And it takes time and resources and media to get that information out there.
Yes, and we appreciate all the hard work that everyone's doing for that, and we're extra appreciative of AI to help out and give us a little bit of a jump start there. This is the last call for your comments and questions. For us to see your comments and questions, you have to use the hashtag #HeyRebecca or hashtag #HeyJuliana. I just wanted to recap really quickly. Tropical development not expected. Now, that first wave of moisture we thought was going to be Dexter over near New Orleans has looped around. It's bringing more tropical moisture to the state again, but we do not expect it to develop. It is just a low pressure system. It's just rain. It's basically a repeat of what happened last week, including some drier air for the weekend. We have some Saharan dust over our area by the weekend, so all of this rainfall potential will be long gone, but in between now and then, we are going to see some heavier showers, especially along the coastline, upwards of 2 to 4 inches on average in the hot spots there. And of course, because we are so saturated, that does increase our flooding risk for today and tomorrow just a bit. But by Thursday, that flooding risk moves on to New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, and even including Texas by Friday there in the Houston area. But it's a low risk. It's a 1 out of 4, so that's the good news. And so for us here at Tracking the Tropics, I'm checking the comment section one more time. I'm not seeing anything. Juliana, I am efforting a guest for some of the weeks to come. I want someone from the Hurricane Committee, from the World Meteorological Organization to join us, because they're who decide on the hurricane names. So they have to decide when they're going to retire a name and what they're going to replace it with. And there's all these intricate rules. So that's my hope. I've put the email out in the universe, but hopefully we won't have anything to talk about next week either. And we can talk about something fun like names.
Exactly. And it is funny, I guess, because it is like interesting, and people are pretty invested in how these systems get named. And honestly, it's been kind of wild how what is the word I'm looking for? Like how much like choice there is. Like I was in college and we were still, the backup list was Greek, the Greek alphabet.
Yes.
And then it just felt like, we're just, which I know that happens from time to time, and it does simplify things to just use names, because it was certainly confusing using the Greek alphabet.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of intriguing to me and a little funny in a way, where it's just like we can the WMO can do what they like, and if we want to name them names, we're going to name them names, and I am curious, who gets to make those calls and the decision process. You know what I mean?
I'm not going to tell them beforehand, but when we get them, if we get them as a guest, I'm going to secretly ask them, did they choose Isaias, just to laugh at a lot of people mispronouncing Isaias?
Yeah. And that's what I have to imagine. Like, there's got to be some little personal
humor there somewhere.
Yeah. Things in there.
All right. Well, our comment section has gone quiet, much like our hurricane season has started. So I'm going to wrap this up, but we will be back here at 12:30 next week, hopefully talking about nothing once again and keeping it fun and light. We also have a Hurricane Hacks episode to pull out when it's quiet. We might do that one next week if there's nothing to talk about as well, but maybe our guest will come through. We've got some exciting episodes planned for you here on Tracking the Tropics, whether it's busy and especially when it's not busy, because those are the ones that we can plan. But if anything does happen, if we start to get a swirl, if we start to get development, we will hop on here immediately and let you know. But for now, from the Stream Center, I'm meteorologist Rebecca Berry, here for also meteorologist Juliana Mejia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.